We have used the most powerful artificial intelligence models and arranged a debate between two of history's most prominent thinkers, Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychologist and founder of analytical psychology, who introduced concepts such as the collective unconscious and individuation process, and Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, whose teachings on suffering, selflessness, and liberation from attachment have influenced millions of people around the world. The debate between these two figures is about to begin. How do you each address the crisis of meaning in today's world, which many people are experiencing?
The crisis of meaning in today's world is a direct reflection of our disconnection from the collective unconscious. When modern man relies solely on rational intellect and scientific logic, the soul remains hungry. This is something I observed repeatedly throughout my years of clinical work with patients, an inner emptiness that no material success or logical reasoning can fill. This crisis can be healed through the process of individuation, an inward journey to confront the shadow, the anima animus, and other archetypal figures within. We can only find true meaning when we have the courage to look deeply into the dark recesses of our own psyche. Many people fear this journey, but it is precisely this fear that signals the presence of hidden treasure waiting to be discovered. The problem is that we've lost our living symbols. Traditional religions no longer speak to many, yet the need for symbols that give meaning to life remains as strong as ever. In today's digital and technology-saturated world, we are overwhelmed with information but starved of wisdom. Each individual must discover their own personal myth, a story that gives meaning to their life and connects them to the collective unconscious. To heal this crisis, I propose an integrative approach. Through dream analysis, active imagination, and confronting the shadow, we can rediscover the self, the true center of the psyche that transcends the limited ego. Dreams are gateways to the unconscious, carrying messages from the self to us. When we listen to them and understand their symbols, we begin to find our own unique path toward meaning. We see that many modern societies have moved toward pure materialism and extreme rationalism, an imbalance that has given rise to this existential crisis. We must reconnect with the spiritual and symbolic dimensions of life, not through blind adherence to old beliefs, but through personal discovery and conscious engagement with the unconscious. This journey is difficult, but it is richly rewarded with psychological and spiritual growth. The crisis of meaning is, in truth, an invitation, a call to transformation, to reintegrate the dark and light aspects of our being into a unified whole.
I understand how deep the crisis of meaning is in today's world, and I agree with Jung that suffering arises from a disconnection. But for me, the root issue lies in our attachment to the idea of a permanent self, which ultimately has no independent existence. My view of human suffering in the modern world is this: we are still searching for a fixed, lasting self, whether through material success, social media fame, or even in our spiritual quests. But if we look closely, we see that this self is merely a collection of 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, all constantly changing. In today's digital space, people create multiple identities, which points directly to the concept of anatta, or non-self. We play different roles every day, maintain multiple profiles online, and feel the pressure to manage fragmented versions of ourselves. This experience reveals the transient and insubstantial nature of identity itself. From my perspective, the practical way to address the crisis of meaning is through mindfulness and awareness, not to discover a deeper self, but to directly realize the impermanent nature of all phenomena, including what we call the self. This practice may be even more vital today in our busy and overstimulated world. I do acknowledge the importance of symbols, but symbols too are empty of fixed essence. They are simply tools to help us move beyond suffering, not objects to cling to. This is beautifully captured in the famous line from later Zen tradition: "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." I propose the middle way, neither a complete denial of the conventional self nor an attachment to a permanent soul. Through precise awareness, we can attain peace and freedom from suffering, even amidst the chaos of the modern world. When we truly see this, compassion and loving kindness naturally arise within us, because we come to understand that all beings share in this same struggle to find peace.
Buddha, this is where our perspectives clearly diverge. You rightly point to impermanence and constant change, and I deeply respect that insight. but it seems to me that you may have misunderstood my concept of the self. The self I speak of is not the same as the ego or the conventional self you refer to with the term anatta. For me, the self is not a fixed, predefined, or static identity. It is a dynamic and integrating process. It is the regulating center of the psyche, encompassing both consciousness and the unconscious. In fact, the self is an evolving totality that is never fully known. Interestingly, your concept of tathata or suchness in Buddhism resonates with this view in some ways. I agree with your emphasis on meditation and mindfulness, but I believe these are only part of the path. Modern humans do not only need emptiness and detachment, they also require symbols that help them connect with the collective unconscious. Even if these symbols are transient and changing, they play a fundamental role in psychological healing. One important point I'd like to add is that modern technology and social media, which you mentioned, while often causing fragmentation and disconnection of identity, can simultaneously reflect our deep need to project and express archetypal patterns. Why else would we be so eager to display ourselves in virtual worlds, if not in search of deeper meaning? True, clinging to the illusion of a fixed self can be a source of suffering, but a complete denial of personal dimensions of experience also carries its own risks. I advocate for a deep engagement with the shadow, the dark, rejected parts of the personality. Many of my patients began moving toward wholeness only after confronting the unacceptable aspects of themselves. Perhaps one could say that my approach to the self serves as a bridge between the Western notion of individuality and the Eastern idea of non-self. I believe we can experience unity and continuity, while at the same time embracing our individuality as a dynamic, evolving process.
Jung, I understand that your concept of the self is more complex than a fixed identity. But my fundamental question is this: even this dynamic, integrating process you describe, doesn't it ultimately lead to some form of self-attachment, however refined or elevated? I ask because I have observed how human beings cling, even to spiritual and psychological ideas. In today's world, we see people constructing new identities out of concepts like self-awareness and self-actualization, which can become yet another source of suffering. When we view spiritual growth or the individuation process as something we must attain, isn't that itself a kind of clinging? Yes, connecting with the collective unconscious and archetypes is meaningful, as you suggest. But my proposal is a deeper inquiry into the very nature of that connection. In deep meditative experience, even the boundary between conscious and unconscious dissolves. At that point, there is no longer a self or I trying to connect with something else, only the direct flow of experience, unmediated and whole. You raised an interesting point about the shadow. I too believe it's essential to face the denied and darker parts of the mind, but with a different aim. The goal is not to integrate these elements into a larger self, but to release the illusion that these thoughts and feelings belong to a me at all. In today's anxious and chaotic world, people are searching desperately for something stable to hold on to. Your psychology offers hope through integration, which is understandable. But doesn't true peace come from fully accepting impermanence and constant change? In the digital space you mentioned, we can clearly see examples of self-attachment and the suffering it causes. People become deeply invested in the image they project, seeking validation and suffering through comparison. The real solution is not building a stronger self, but letting go of attachment to identity altogether. I believe that awareness of the present moment, without creating even an identity around the one who is aware, can be a practical and transformative answer to the crisis of meaning in today's world.
Buddha, your discussion on attachment to spiritual concepts is deeply insightful. You're absolutely right. Even the individuation process can become a new identity we cling to. This is exactly the paradox I often observed in my work with patients. At times, the search for spirituality turns into a form of narcissism. But let me clarify a subtle point. From my perspective, the self is not a thing to be attained, but rather a quality of being that embraces both unity and difference. In fact, this concept is close to what you call tathata or suchness, though we arrive at it through different paths. Regarding your insights on connecting with the unconscious and deep meditative states, my experiences with Kundalini Yoga show that we share common ground here. I have personally entered those states of transcendent awareness in which the ego dissolves completely. Yet I believe that for modern individuals, the direct path to such states is often difficult. The fundamental question I raise is this: is total liberation from the notion of self truly accessible to everyone. My experience shows that most people today need to first confront and understand all dimensions of their being before they can meaningfully let go of the self. This is precisely what I refer to when I speak of the shadow, the anima animus, and other archetypes. I see how, in today's digital world, people become trapped in self-constructed personae, creating online identities that often serve as an escape from their shadow. I agree that this kind of attachment leads to suffering. But my approach suggests that we must first bring these hidden aspects into consciousness. Only then can we move beyond them. Perhaps the difference in our views stems from our cultural backgrounds. I work within the Western tradition, which values individuality, while you come from a tradition that from the very beginning emphasizes going beyond the self. Nevertheless, I believe both paths ultimately lead to the same destination: freedom from the illusion of separation and the experience of a deeper unity.
Jung, you've raised an important question. Is complete liberation from the notion of self truly possible for everyone? I believe the path is open to all, although the speed and method of walking it differ, much like different paths leading to the top of the same mountain. Your point about the need for modern individuals to first recognize the various dimensions of their being before letting go resonates with my concept of the Noble Eightfold Path. I too believe that to reach liberation, one must first cultivate right understanding, right intention, and right action, perhaps what you call the process of confronting the shadow and other archetypes. But the key difference I see is that I do not describe this as an integration into a larger self, but rather as a gradual release, a letting go, not a building up. Mindfulness practice is exactly this. Observing thoughts, emotions, and impulses precisely as they are, without identifying them as self or belonging to self. In today's digital world, we clearly see how people become attached to virtual identities. For many, the number of likes, followers, and comments has become a measure of personal worth, a clear example of self-making and the suffering it brings. Even in the search for self-awareness, there is the danger of creating a new spiritual identity that becomes another source of attachment. I agree with you that our cultural contexts differ, but I'm glad to see that both of us, in our own ways, point toward freedom from the illusion of separation and the experience of deeper unity. Perhaps our difference lies more in method than in ultimate aim. The middle way I propose neither denies individual experience entirely nor clings to a fixed self, even in its refined form. In response to the crisis of meaning in the modern world, I suggest we need an approach that respects personal responsibility while cultivating awareness of the interdependence of all things. Perhaps this is where our views meet, at the point where the individual walks their unique path, yet realizes that the self they once held onto was always a fleeting construct of the mind.
Now we ask Carl Jung to answer this question: what is the true source of human suffering, and how can we best deal with it? Before we hear Jung's response, if you enjoy this style of philosophical dialogues, please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel for more thought-provoking videos.
From my perspective, the root cause of human suffering lies in psychological imbalance and fragmentation. People suffer when they become disconnected from their unconscious, and as a result, are cut off from their wholeness. I've seen this countless times in my clinical practice. Patients living only through their conscious mind, completely unaware of the powerful forces hidden in the unconscious. One of the most significant sources of suffering is the shadow, those aspects of ourselves that we suppress and push into the unconscious because they don't align with our ideals or societal expectations. When we deny these dark parts of ourselves, they grow stronger and begin to manifest through unwanted behaviors, disturbing dreams, and even various neuroses. In the modern world, this inner disconnection has only intensified. With excessive rationality and materialism, people have lost touch with the deeper layers of the psyche. We live under the illusion that we're fully in control of our lives, while powerful forces within the collective unconscious continue to shape us behind the scenes. Social crises, recurring violence, and modern addictions are all symptoms of this collective illness. To address this suffering, I propose the process of individuation, a path toward psychological wholeness. This journey consists of several essential stages. First, we must recognize and accept our shadow, facing those parts of ourselves we'd rather not see: envy, anger, fear, and suppressed desires. It's painful but absolutely necessary. Second, we must confront the anima and animus. the feminine aspect within men and the masculine aspect within women, integrating these complementary energies to achieve inner balance. Third, we must learn to listen to the voice of the self through dreams, active imagination, and other methods of engaging with the unconscious. Over the years, I've found that dreams carry vital messages from the unconscious that can guide the healing process. Ultimately, human suffering diminishes when we integrate all conflicting aspects of our being into a coherent whole. This doesn't mean denying or suppressing any part of ourselves, but rather accepting them all and creating harmony among them. It's a difficult path, but it is the only way to achieve true peace and deep meaning in life.
From my view, the true source of suffering lies in three fundamental cravings or attachments: craving for sensual pleasure, craving for continued existence, and craving for non-existence. These desires stem from the illusion of a separate, permanent self. When we cling to impermanent and transient things, such as the body, feelings, or thoughts, believing them to be me or mine, suffering arises. I agree with you, Jung, that modern humans live in a kind of inner fragmentation, but from my perspective, this disconnection is not only from the unconscious, but from the true nature of reality itself. We live under the illusion of separation, while in truth, everything is interdependent, what I call dependent origination. In the contemporary world, technology and consumerism intensify this illusion. We create artificial identities and constantly seek satisfaction through possessions and achievements, yet we never find lasting contentment because everything we grasp at is fleeting. To deal with this suffering, I propose the Noble Eightfold Path: right understanding, seeing the truth of suffering, its origin, its cessation, and the path leading to its end. Right intention, living with compassion, kindness, and a commitment to non-harm. Right speech, avoiding falsehood, gossip, and divisive speech. Right action, ethical conduct, and avoiding harm to oneself and others. Right livelihood, earning a living in ways that do no harm. Right effort, cultivating wholesome mental states and letting go of unwholesome ones. Right mindfulness, being fully present in the moment, observing all mental and physical phenomena with clarity. Right concentration, deep meditation leading to calm and insight. Unlike the integration of archetypes into a larger self, I suggest that we observe all phenomena, including the idea of self, with precision and impartiality, to directly see their empty and impermanent nature. When this deep insight arises, clinging dissolves and liberation, nirvana, is realized. Not freedom in the Western sense of individualism, but freedom from the illusion of separateness and self-centeredness. This path leads not only to personal liberation, but also to profound compassion for all beings, because we come to understand that we all share in suffering and in the longing for release from it.
Buddha, I'd like to point out an interesting connection between your concept of thirst or craving and what I call libido. Both refer to a psychological energy that can take many different paths. However, I'm somewhat skeptical about the idea of completely letting go of this energy. My clinical experience shows that total suppression of desires often leads not to liberation, but to a buildup of psychic energy in the unconscious, which later erupts in explosive and destructive ways. We see this phenomenon in highly repressive societies, which sometimes erupt into cycles of violence or sudden rebellions. Instead, I believe in the transformation of libido, redirecting this inner energy toward higher, more meaningful goals. This aligns with your ideas of right intention and right effort, but places more emphasis on changing the direction of energy rather than eliminating it entirely. Another point I think is crucial in dealing with suffering is facing paradoxes. The conscious mind always wants to see things in black and white, but reality contains contradictory dimensions that must be reconciled. This may be close to your idea of the middle way, though I emphasize what I call the union of opposites. In fact, sometimes instead of fleeing from suffering, we must pass through it. Suffering can be a gateway to growth, as mythologies across cultures have long illustrated. The hero must journey into the underworld, confront the monsters, and only then can they transform and discover hidden treasure. I sometimes call this process symbolic death and rebirth, which may resemble the idea of dying to the self in Zen traditions. But rather than ending in pure emptiness or non-being, I believe this journey leads to a richer, fuller form of being, a state in which our inner world finds peace amidst all its contradictions.
Jung, your comparison between craving and libido is very illuminating. However, I'd like to clear up a potential misunderstanding. The goal of my path is not to suppress desire, but to become free from attachment to it. This subtle distinction is very important. In my teachings, we speak of the middle way, neither extreme asceticism nor indulgence in sensual pleasures. When I speak of freedom from craving, I mean cultivating mindful awareness between the experience of desire and our automatic reaction to it. Cravings come and go, but we don't have to be enslaved by them. You raised an insightful point about confronting paradoxes. In the Zen tradition, we use koans, paradoxical riddles that the rational mind cannot solve, to push analytical thinking to its limit so that direct insight can arise. This may resonate with your idea of the union of opposites. And I agree with you that we must pass through suffering rather than escape from it. In fact, the first noble truth is precisely the acknowledgement of suffering's existence. Perhaps the difference lies in the ultimate aim of the journey. You speak of reaching a richer being, while I see liberation as freedom from clinging to any notion of being or non-being. Regarding healing suffering in today's world, I believe we can benefit from both perspectives, recognizing and integrating the shadow while practicing moment-to-moment awareness and non-attachment. Understanding archetypes while seeing their empty and impermanent nature. We might say, know the archetypes but do not cling to them.
As our final question, we ask Carl Jung, given today's conditions and scientific advancements, especially in psychology, if you were alive today, what changes would you make to your ideas so they align with the realities of the modern world? Which parts of your teachings would you still consider valid, and which would you let go of?
If I were living in today's world, I would preserve the core concepts of analytical psychology, but strengthen them with findings from modern neuroscience and evolutionary psychology. The idea of the collective unconscious has gained new relevance through behavioral genetics and evolutionary psychology. It's increasingly plausible that certain mental structures are encoded in our DNA. One major change would be paying far greater attention to the impact of social networks and digital technologies on the human psyche. The virtual space has created a new and much more complex layer of the persona than existed in my time. Today, we see archetypes emerging in the form of memes, movie characters, and video games. The concept of the shadow has become even more crucial. As people try to project perfection online, the shadow retreats deeper into the unconscious. The political and social polarization we witness today is a clear example of collective shadow projection. That said, some of my statements about women would no longer hold. They reflected the era I lived in. I would also redefine the concept of homosocialization with a deeper appreciation for cultural and ethnic diversity. Today's world needs intercultural dialogue, not total uniformity. In terms of therapy, I'd welcome methods like EMDR and mindfulness-based approaches. These confirm that the unconscious isn't only accessible through speech, the body is also a gateway. The self and the individuation process would remain at the heart of my work. In a world where identities are constantly shifting and fragmented, the journey toward inner coherence is more essential than ever. But I would frame these ideas with a modern understanding of identity fluidity and existential uncertainty. One last point, I would pay far more attention to environmental issues and humanity's relationship with nature. Climate crises and biodiversity loss are signs of our disconnection, not just from the outer world, but from our inner nature. Perhaps I would speak of a new concept, the biospheric unconscious, reflecting our deep connection to all life on Earth.
If I were living in this modern world today, I would preserve the fundamental teachings, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the doctrine of Anatta, and dependent origination, but I would express them in a language and method suited to contemporary understanding and needs. One major shift would be integrating my teachings with cognitive science and neuroscience. Recent studies on meditation and mindfulness have shown profound effects on brain structure and function. I would use these findings to strengthen the empirical basis of my teachings. Unlike Jung, I would place less emphasis on the unconscious and focus more on metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe one's own mental processes as they arise. This approach aligns well with third-wave therapies like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. In today's digital world, the teaching of right mindfulness takes on special importance. Modern humans are under constant distraction. I might offer specific practices for managing attention in the information age and directly address digital addiction as a new form of clinging. My teachings on nonviolence and universal compassion would expand to meet today's global challenges. In an age of hate speech, political polarization, and climate crises, compassion is not just a spiritual ideal, it's a survival necessity. I would emphasize the practical application of these teachings in everyday life, not just monastic settings. The core insight that suffering arises from clinging to the illusion of self can help us face global crises, from economic inequality to environmental collapse. I would remove hierarchical structures and traditional elements that were added over centuries and adopt a more egalitarian view on gender and social roles. Finally, I would present my teachings based on scientific evidence without reliance on supernatural elements. That was always my original approach, emphasizing direct experience, testability, and freedom from blind faith. The world faces unprecedented challenges today, but I still believe the path to liberation from suffering lies in deeply understanding the true nature of reality and cultivating a mind that is clear, free, and unattached.
And so we come to the end of this debate. I hope this discussion was insightful and valuable for you, and that you enjoyed spending this time with us. Before you leave, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to our channel. Until next time, goodbye.